All right, listeners, ready for today's deep dive?
Always.
Well, today we're looking at something pretty crucial. It's all about getting Europe ready for anything. I mean, we're talking big stuff, pandemics, climate issues, the whole gamut, even cyber warfare.
Future-proofing the EU, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the source material we're going through is fascinating. A report, actually.
Yeah.
Commissioned by the European Commission itself.
So the real deal, huh?
Oh, yeah.
And it's called Safer Together. Catchy title, right?
Plug it.
The full title is Safer Together, Strengthening Europe's Civilian and Military Preparedness and Readiness. It was put together by Sauli Niinistö. You might recognize the name. He's the former president of Finland.
Definitely an expert on these things.
And you know what? This report, it doesn't mess around.
Straight to the point.
It basically says that in our world, everything, and I mean everything, can be weaponized.
It's a pretty bold statement.
Okay, wait, hold on. Weaponized. That sounds kind of like we're in a sci-fi movie or something. What does that even mean in real life?
Think about how much Europe depended on gas from Russia.
Okay, yeah.
When the war in Ukraine started, that dependence, well, it became a massive problem. Suddenly, something as basic as energy, keeping the lights on it, was being used like a weapon.
Wow.
In a geopolitical fight. So it's not just about armies and missiles anymore, right?
No, I guess not. So, trade, technology, you're saying those can be weapons too.
Absolutely. Even migration flows can be used strategically. The report has a term for this: risk multipliers.
Risk multipliers. Okay, that sounds a little ominous.
It basically means we're not dealing with separate threats anymore. Everything's interconnected, and they all make each other worse.
So one crisis can set off a chain reaction?
Like dominoes.
Yeah.
And these aren't just theoretical risks either. The report actually lays out specific scenarios, stuff Europe needs to be ready for, and some of them are pretty surprising.
Okay, now I'm getting nervous. Give me the rundown. What are some of these worst-case scenarios they're talking about?
All right, well, one is another pandemic.
Oh, no, not another one.
And I don't just mean a new COVID variant this time.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about things like zoonotic diseases. Ones that jump from animals to humans.
Oh, yeah.
Or even engineered pathogens.
Engineered, like man-made.
Potentially. It's not something to take lightly.
Definitely not. Okay, so pandemics 2.0, that's one. What else?
Then there are climate-driven disruptions. We're talking extreme events here.
Oh, like what?
Well, imagine heat waves so intense that they basically shut down infrastructure.
Can't even turn on the AC.
Exactly. Or droughts so bad that food supplies are decimated, floods that displace entire populations.
So everyday life, basically everything we rely on could be thrown into chaos.
It is a real possibility, according to the report.
Okay, so pandemics, climate chaos, anything else we should be worried about?
How about cyber attacks?
Ugh, don't even get me started. I swear every week there's a new data breach.
This is way beyond stolen data, though.
Okay, even worse than that. How?
Imagine attacks that could shut down entire power grids, or hospitals, even take down whole militaries.
Now that is scary. And you're saying this report actually talks about this stuff.
It lays out some very specific scenarios, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so external threats, pandemics, climate change, cyber attacks. Got it. Anything else?
Actually, the report highlights something else that's crucial. It says the EU itself needs to be able to operate under pressure.
What does that even mean? Isn't the EU supposed to, provide aid and coordinate things during a crisis? That's kind of their whole thing, right?
It is, but think back to those first few months of the pandemic. Remember the border closures, the supply chains going haywire, countries hoarding resources? It felt like every man for himself out there.
Yeah, it was rough.
The report is saying that the core functions of the EU, things like the single market, the free movement of people, those need to be resilient too.
So we don't end up with everyone just looking out for themselves.
Exactly. If those systems break down, we risk having internal division and instability on top of whatever external crisis we're facing.
Makes sense. Okay, so we need to make the system itself more shock-proof?
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because the report kind of blurs the lines between civilian and military preparedness.
Blurs the lines, huh? I'm not sure I follow. Is that a new thing?
I think it reflects how the nature of conflict is changing. Those old distinctions between civilian and military, they're not so clear-cut anymore.
Okay, give me an example. I'm a visual learner.
Think about hybrid warfare. It's a term you hear a lot these days.
I've heard it, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
Well, it includes things like disinformation campaigns, trying to influence elections or public opinion, or cyber attacks that target key infrastructure. economic coercion, using trade as a weapon to force concessions.
So basically messing with people's minds and systems rather than just straight up military force.
Exactly. And it can be just as disruptive as traditional warfare, but it doesn't fit neatly into those old categories.
So it's like fighting a war without any clear battle lines.
You got it. And even in a traditional war, the effects on civilians can be devastating these days. Look at the refugee crisis from Ukraine, or how cyber attacks can target civilian infrastructure.
So are you saying Europe's heading towards becoming some kind of militarized society? Because that doesn't sound great.
Actually, the report emphasizes the opposite. Having a strong civilian preparedness framework, that's actually key to avoiding the need for military solutions, whenever possible anyway. It's about using the right tools for the job.
So not turning Europe into some fortress.
No, it's more about being adaptable, building resilience into every level of society, from governments and businesses, all the way down to individual citizens.
And speaking of citizens, this report talks a lot about individual preparedness.
It does.
So what can regular people do? What's our role in all of this?
Well, first off, it's not about stocking up on canned goods and building a bunker in your backyard.
Good, because I'm not really the DIY type.
It's more about raising awareness. People need to understand the range of threats out there, whether it's pandemics, cyber attacks, natural disasters. But it's not about scaring people.
Right, that's not helpful. So more about giving people the knowledge and tools to actually do something.
Exactly. It's about saying, hey, here's what you can do to protect yourself, your family, your community.
I like that. Empowering people.
The report even suggests things like teaching people basic cybersecurity skills, how to spot a phishing email, things like that, first aid training, even media literacy to help people spot disinformation.
Wow, so basically a whole curriculum for being a prepared citizen.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And, even simple things like knowing how to secure your home Wi-Fi network, that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, those little things can add up.
Absolutely. But it goes beyond individual skills, too. It's also about communities being resilient.
Makes sense. In a crisis, we all rely on each other.
Exactly. The report really emphasizes the importance of strong community networks. Knowing your neighbors, trusting your local institutions, having systems in place to support each other during emergencies.
So it's not about isolating yourself and hoping for the best. It's about being connected, working together.
That's it. Strong communities are way more resilient than isolated individuals.
Okay, this is all great. But let's talk about the big elephant in the room. Money.
Ah, yes. The budget question.
Because all this preparedness, it sounds expensive.
It is an investment, for sure. But the report makes a very strong case that it's one that pays off. And actually, that's what we're going to unpack in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. You've got to tell me more. But for now, we'll have to leave it there.
So we're back. And last time, you kind of left off with this idea that getting prepared is more like an investment than just a cost.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm still a bit skeptical about that.
Fair enough. It's a big shift in thinking. But to really get why the report frames it this way, we have to look at how they see crises differently.
Okay, so what's their big new idea?
Well, in the past, we tended to think about crises in these neat little boxes.
Yeah, like a pandemic, that's a health problem, right?
Right. And a cyber attack, that's a tech issue. Military conflict, well, that's for the military to handle. Everything's separate.
But it feels like these days it's way more complicated than that.
Exactly. And that's what this report is getting at. It's like a cyber attack could cripple hospitals, a pandemic could mess up global trade, and a war could trigger both an energy crisis and a refugee crisis all at the same time.
Okay, yeah. Things can definitely snowball pretty quickly. So the old way of thinking, it's just not cutting it anymore.
Exactly. And the report argues that how we prepare needs to reflect this new reality. We can't afford to have different parts of the government working in isolation.
So it's not enough to have, like, the health ministry handling pandemics and the defense ministry handling military threats.
No, it needs to be way more integrated.
So how do they propose we actually do that?
They call for a whole-of-government approach. Basically, different sectors, agencies, everyone working together, seamlessly. Within the EU, between the EU and its member states. No more silos.
So more like a united front.
Exactly. They even suggest creating a central crisis hub within the European Commission itself.
Oh, interesting. Like a command center for crisis response.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. A place where all the information comes in, experts from different fields work together, and decisions can be made quickly. And that actually leads to another crucial point: information sharing.
Oh, yeah, I can see how that would be super important when everything's so interconnected.
Absolutely. The report really emphasizes this. Secure, interoperable systems. So everyone's connected, EU institutions, member states, partners, even private businesses, all getting real-time updates and able to share critical information fast.
So no more working in the dark, everyone on the same page.
Exactly. It's about breaking down those information silos. Transparency, a unified approach, it's key. But it's not just about technology either. The report also talks a lot about empowering citizens to be more prepared.
Now, I think that's something a lot of our listeners are wondering about. What can regular people actually do to be part of this whole resilience thing?
Well, first of all, it starts with awareness.
Mm.
People need to understand the risks we face, right? Whether it's a pandemic or a cyber attack, a natural disaster.
Mm.
But it's about presenting that information in a way that empowers them, not scares them into inaction.
So no doom and gloom, right? More like, okay, here's the problem, but here's also what you can do about it.
Exactly. It's about giving people practical knowledge and solutions.
I like that. So not just telling people to be scared, but actually giving them the tools to do something.
Exactly. And the report even recommends, teaching specific skills, like basic cybersecurity, how to spot a phishing email, stuff like that, first aid training, even media literacy.
Media literacy.
Yeah. So people can spot disinformation and propaganda. Don't fall for fake news,
Oh, right. So basically, it's like a whole curriculum for being a prepared citizen.
Yeah, kind of. And the thing is, even simple things like knowing how to secure your home Wi-Fi, those can make a big difference.
Yeah, those small steps can really add up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also about more than individual skills. It's about community resilience, too.
Right. Because when something bad happens, we all have to rely on each other. Right.
Exactly. And the report, it stresses how important strong community networks are. It's about knowing your neighbors, trusting your local institutions, having those systems in place to support each other during emergencies.
So it's not about hunkering down and waiting for the government to save you.
No. It's about being connected to the people around you, working together. That's what makes a community truly resilient. Now, there's another aspect of collaboration that the report highlights, and it's a bit, well, it can be a sensitive topic.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
EU-NATO cooperation.
Ah, yeah, that's definitely a tricky one.
Definitely a lot of nuances there. But the report makes a pretty strong argument that closer coordination between the EU and NATO is essential, especially when it comes to those major military threats we were talking about.
Okay, so how do they see that working? I mean, they have different roles, right? Different mandates.
They're very clear that NATO, that remains the cornerstone of collective defense for its members. That hasn't changed. But they say the EU also has a role to play, particularly when it comes to hybrid threats, managing civilian crises, and just generally building resilience.
So it's about making sure their efforts are complementary, not competing.
Exactly. And that involves having clear plans for how they would coordinate in different crisis scenarios. So it's not just about internal cooperation either. The report also talks about this idea of mutual resilience with partners around the world.
Because a lot of these threats, they're global, right?
Right. Think about climate change, pandemics, cyber attacks. Those don't stop at borders. So this idea is that helping partner countries become more resilient, it actually benefits the EU too.
Like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. It's about strengthening the whole system. So the report recommends investing more in diplomacy, building strategic partnerships, capacity building programs, helping those partners prepare for and respond to crises.
Sharing knowledge, providing support, that kind of thing.
Exactly. They even suggest creating these regional mutual resilience centers.
Mutual resilience centers, what are those?
Basically hubs for sharing knowledge and taking joint action.
Oh, interesting. So like a global network of think tanks and training centers all dedicated to preparedness.
You got it. Places where experts from different countries can come together, share best practices, develop strategies, and learn from each other.
I love that.
So yeah, we've covered a lot of ground here, haven't we? From strengthening coordination within the EU, to empowering citizens, to forging those stronger partnerships around the world.
It's a lot to take in. It sounds like a very comprehensive approach.
It's about weaving resilience into the very fabric of society, recognizing that this isn't just the responsibility of governments. It's on individuals, communities, businesses, international partners. We all have a role to play.
It's a huge undertaking, for sure. But it's also kind of inspiring in a way. Like we're at this point where we can choose to either be swept away by events or actually shape our own destiny.
And this report makes a pretty compelling argument for the latter. By embracing preparedness, investing in resilience, working together, we can create a future where Europe not only survives, but actually thrives. But there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we haven't really tackled yet: the economics of it all.
Ah, yes. The money question. Because a lot of people, when they hear preparedness, they immediately think about big government spending, higher taxes, maybe even some economic disruption as we shift priorities.
Right, and those are valid concerns.
Yeah.
What this report argues is that investing in preparedness, it can actually strengthen Europe's economy, not weaken it.
All right, so last time we were talking about how investing and getting prepared, it can actually make Europe's economy stronger. But I gotta be honest, I'm still kind of struggling to wrap my head around that.
It is a big shift in thinking, for sure. It seems counterintuitive at first, right? Spend money to prepare for potential problems instead of just focusing on growth.
Exactly. It feels like it would be the other way around, like spending money we might not have, and maybe even causing some disruptions as we change focus.
All valid concerns, for sure. But what this report argues is that it's not an either-or situation. It's not like we have to choose between a strong economy and being prepared.
Okay, so you're saying we can have both. I'm all ears.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
They're making the case that it's not this zero-sum game, that we can actually boost the economy by being more resilient.
Okay, I'm listening. Convince me. How does preparing for, worst-case scenarios actually lead to a better economy?
Well, think about cybersecurity for a second.
Okay.
If we invest heavily in that area, what happens? Businesses, our critical infrastructure, it all becomes more secure.
Right.
And that makes investors feel more confident, right?
Okay.
Europe becomes a more attractive place to do business.
So it's like we're building a reputation for stability.
Exactly. Companies are much more likely to invest in a place where they know their operations aren't going to be constantly disrupted, whether it's cyber attacks or other kinds of crises.
Makes sense. Okay, so cybersecurity, that's one area. What else?
What about supply chains?
Yeah. Those are pretty important these days.
If we diversify our suppliers, don't put all our eggs in one basket, especially with countries that might be, politically unstable.
Spreading the risk.
Exactly. That makes our economy way more robust,
Yeah.
more resilient to shocks.
I see your point. So it's not just about, battening down the hatches and weathering the storm. It's about actually building a stronger foundation for the future.
That's a great way to put it. And the thing is, these investments in resilience, they can actually create new jobs, whole new industries, right here in Europe.
Really? What's...
Think about green technologies, renewable energy. That whole sector becomes more and more important as we have to deal with, climate change and resource scarcity.
Right, so it's like turning those challenges into opportunities.
Exactly. Finding ways to make preparedness a driver of innovation and growth. And that's something this report really highlights.
Okay, that is pretty exciting. But let's be real for a second. Even if all this is true, this is all going to require some tough decisions, isn't it? I mean, a lot of countries are already facing economic uncertainty.
You're not wrong. The report acknowledges that there will be trade-offs. We're talking about shifting priorities, which means resources might have to be moved around.
So the EU is going to have to get a lot more strategic about how it spends money.
Absolutely. One of the key takeaways here is that we need to focus on initiatives that have a multiplier effect, things that benefit multiple areas at once.
More bang for the buck, basically.
You got it. And they also talk about streamlining funding mechanisms, less red tape, more efficiency.
Makes sense. But this can't all fall on governments, right? What about businesses? Do they have a role to play in all this?
They're a huge part of it, for sure. The report really stresses engaging the private sector, not just in terms of sharing information, but also creating incentives for businesses to invest in their own resilience.
Because ultimately, everyone benefits from a more stable and predictable world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the report's argument is that by working together, governments, businesses, citizens, we can actually create a virtuous cycle. Investing in preparedness leads to greater economic security, which then fuels more investment, more innovation, and so on.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot in this deep dive. From the complex threats Europe faces to the whole idea of building resilience at every level, from individual citizens to international collaborations. And then this really interesting argument that preparing for the worst can actually lead to a stronger economy.
It's been a really in-depth look, and we've only just scratched the surface, to be honest. This report is packed with insights, and we really encourage everyone listening to check it out for themselves if they want to dig deeper.
We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes. But if I had to sum up the report's message in one sentence, it would be this. Preparedness is not about hunkering down and being afraid. It's about building a stronger, more resilient Europe that can actually shape the future, not just react to it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that while the challenges are complex, so is Europe's capacity for innovation, for cooperation, for collective action. I truly believe we can do this.
Well said. And as we wrap things up, we want to leave you with this one thought. What can you do in your own life, in your community, to contribute to a more prepared and resilient Europe? The answer might surprise you. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay prepared.
Thanks for joining us.